Well, Oregon could still have one more move to make for their 2024 recruiting class. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, hopefully with a full voice for the rest of the show. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Got my guy Max Torres with me today at mtorresports on X, formerly known as Twitter, host of the Ducks Dish podcast, covers Oregon for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. You just started another gig, didn't you, as well? Or am I thinking of somebody else? And I might have my homies crossed up on that one. But he's busy on the recruiting grind as always. Max, there's really only one name for Oregon to watch for as National Signing Day approaches, which defeats the purpose of calling it a National Signing Day. We might as well call it a secondary signing day at this point. But Jim Harbaugh leaves Michigan, goes to the NFL. Gatlin Bear is the name to watch for. What do you know on that front?
Gatlin Bear is definitely that guy to watch for the Ducks. I mean, I got to see him out in Texas for the Adidas All-American Bowl, and he was one of those guys I was really looking forward to seeing, not only because I knew that he was a guy that Oregon was recruiting heavily, but because he plays in Idaho, and you just wanted to see how he stacked up against a lot of the top players in the country, and I think he more than held his own during his time out there at the Alamo Dome, playing in that big-time game under the national spotlight. But as for Gatlin Bear, I don't think a lot of details have changed recently. He was kind of already more or less working from an unofficial de facto top two of Michigan and Oregon going into that week of practices and then the bowl game. And it's still Michigan and Oregon. And he's going to be making his decision, signing with one of those two programs. And just under 2 weeks here, I think February 7th is that day that we have circled on the calendar. But he said all the right things about Oregon and just talked about how much he really likes Junior Adams and Dan Lanning. And the Ducks have really made it a point to get out to Burley to continue recruiting him as the contact period continues throughout the country. So I think that the Ducks really like where they're standing here in this recruitment. I think they already had a good chance before this Harbaugh news dropped, but now that Harbaugh is officially coming to Los Angeles to hopefully resurrect Justin Herbert as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, I think this could really shake things up in a significant way for Gatlin Bear, just because the thing that was interesting, Spencer, when I asked him about Michigan, I made it a point to maybe not focus so much on the Harbaugh speculation or that part of his recruitment, but I just went out and asked him, and I said, hey, what's the story with Michigan? And he was quick to compliment their development across the board at every position, the weight room and everything. But then I have a quote here that I think would probably be good to read just for the listeners. He said, the question mark right now is kind of what's going on with Coach Harbaugh. Regardless of what happens with Coach Harbaugh, Coach Moore has done a phenomenal job when he stepped in and coached. He said, I can't really speak on. I don't know what's going to happen there. From what Coach Harbaugh says, I don't think he wants to leave. There's obviously all kinds of speculation, things like that. I'm not going to speculate. I'm going to go based off of what he told me. So we'll see what happens there. But really, I asked him kind of what needs to happen between now and when you make your final decision. And there is one big factor. Continuing on, he said, quote, a lot of it will come down to what Coach Harbaugh does before I can make an accurate decision. You have to have all the information before, and then at that point, if nothing happens there, then I'll just kind of continue to, I'm reading this verbatim, but I have a great relationship with everyone, so it just kind of comes down to what it is that I feel like will be best for my future. So after hearing all that, you kind of have to think that this would at least sway it a little bit more in Oregon's favor right now.
Yeah, and him, a couple of weeks ago having brought up Sharon Moore means this is not something that is catching Gatlin Bear off guard. And just for those who don't know, he's a highly rated 24/7 Sports composite 4-star wideout. 24/7 has him as a 5-star. Not everywhere does, though, but his composite rating is similar to that of Jeremiah McLaughlin. He's got elite speed. He's a track guy out in Idaho, is where Burley is. if memory serves here, and I'm getting my geography right, and I think I am. I often am, but certainly not always. So I think that for the Ducks, this is a guy that you would definitely love to have, but he's not someone that will make an impact in the 2024 class, though he'll be a part of it. He's actually a long-term guy for the Ducks. This recruitment is more about, a statement to make on the trail and proving once again that Oregon can go toe-to-toe with the biggest schools, the biggest brands in the country, and get a guy like this, because he's going to take a 2-year mission. So this is a guy who won't actually be on campus if he commits to the Ducks until 2026. But that has not happened yet, and we'll have to wait and see what happens on National Signing Day here. But how do you feel him, having mentioned Sharon Moore in that interview, affects his recruitment as Harbaugh has now gone off to the NFL and Sharon Moore is expected to be the head coach?
I think it gives Michigan some sort of sense of security or continuity as much as you kind of can in all this crazy coaching carousel round 2 that we've gotten here in the past couple of weeks following Nick Saban's retirement. So I think, like you said, this move doesn't catch Gatlin Bear by surprise. I feel like Michigan would probably still think they have a pretty decent chance, but you also have to see what happens with their staff. And, if Sharon Moore is the new head coach, who does Harbaugh take with him to his new job in Los Angeles? I think that could play a big factor in it, because you see all of the relationships and how big of a role that plays into recruitment. So I think Michigan probably still feels good. I mean, when you're down to only 2 schools, I think that would kind of be the logical take. But again, I think this kind of is looking like it could be trending in Oregon's favor, especially with the stability that Dan Lanning has really created around that program and given fans. And I mean, I've talked to a couple of recruits since he said he was staying, and like multiple recruits have mentioned that and how that's appealing to them, just knowing that they have that stability and they know that Lanning's going to be there for the foreseeable future. So I think that you got to feel like you're in a good spot here if you're Oregon, but only time will tell.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point about the stability element of it. And I brought on Brian Smith to the show when Lanning had, said he's staying with Oregon, not going anywhere and everything like that. And he said, yeah, of course that's going to help in recruiting. And I think for this particular recruitment, it's applicable, because Bear's going to take a 2-year mission, so he wouldn't actually be on campus till 2026. He wants to talk to a coach who knows that he's going to be there. And I think that's the advantage that Oregon has here, is Lanning has made it clear if he's willing to not, give a more serious look to Alabama, even though they were interested in him. I don't know what job he would be looking for. And Kirby Smart is not going anywhere at Georgia for the next couple of years. He's going to be just fine. And I think he's going to be there for a good while longer, because he's really, really good. And he's not as old as Nick Saban. So I think that for Lanning to have that card to play in his back pocket is an advantage for the Ducks, because, I don't know what Junior Adams' aspirations are, but he was a wide receiver coach at Washington. He's a wide receiver coach at Oregon. It's not as if that's a bad way to live. It certainly is not. And Oregon staff has had a lot of continuity. So I think being able to kind of offer that as, a token of sincerity of, hey, we mean it when we say we're going to be here by the time you're ready to play college football, I think certainly helps for the Ducks. And Junior Adams, it would just be another feather in his cap for recruiting. I mean, you look at, the recruiting cycle that he had, flipping Ryan Pelham from USC and Jeremiah McLaughlin from Ohio State. You've got a great receiver room as is. Evan Stewart coming in from the portal. You've done very, very well in that regard. We're going to talk about the offseason moves that Oregon has made so far later in the show. I want Max's thoughts there. And I want Max's thoughts, perhaps most of all, on the hottest pursuit for Oregon in the transfer portal. That's Washington corner Jabbar Muhammad. First, I want all of your thoughts on Gametime. Here are mine. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is obsessed with helping you find ways to save money on tickets. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last minute deals. So go check them out today. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Right now, all Gametime users get that $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Gametime app, spell out VEGAS100, that's Vegas100 for a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. A little second segment sip to propel us on with today's show. So Jabbar Muhammad is the hottest name for Oregon in the transfer portal. He's the biggest name. These are really the only two guys, Jabbar Muhammad and Gatlin Bear, that Oregon is actively after, at least that we're aware of. Who knows what happens come National Signing Day and flips and everything like that. But most of Oregon's class signed back on the early signing day in December, which is just a dumb place to put a signing date. But, let's just save that discussion for another day. The Washington corner, I think, would be a tremendous addition to the secondary. I think he'd come in and start right away. You've been close to the ground on this situation, Max. What are you hearing about Oregon going after Jabbar Muhammad?
I'm hearing that Oregon has a really good shot here with Jabbar Muhammad. He's been working from a top three of Alabama, Texas, and Oregon pretty much from the jump when he entered the portal after the national championship game. So he's taken a couple of visits out to Texas and Alabama, and Oregon is expected to host him later on this week. He could be on campus depending on, when you're hearing this, but they're going to get the last visit in this recruitment. And I think that the last visit has always carried significant weight in recruiting, but it's interesting, Spencer, how the first visit has almost become more impactful for transfer portal commitments, just seeing how recruitments, I should say, just seeing how quickly those things come together and move. A lot of these guys already know where they're headed before they even enter the transfer portal. That's just the reality of a lot of these situations. But I think Oregon has a really good shot here. They have, I wouldn't say a glaring need, but I would still think a need at corner or just in the secondary, needing to take that to the next level because, their pass defense wasn't what it needed to be, in those big moments, looking at that game against Washington as one of the prime examples. But I think Oregon's got a really good shot here. They've got strong ties into Texas, which is where Jabbar Muhammad is from. They sent some of their heavy hitters, Dan Lanning, Tosh Lapoy, Chris Hampton, out to visit him after he entered the transfer portal. So they are all in as you can be on Jabbar Muhammad, and he would be a tremendous addition for the Ducks with a decision expected after that visit wraps up.
So he's taken visits elsewhere. Oregon expect to have the last one this weekend. You talked about the first visit being more impactful with transfer portal guys. Why do you feel like that's the case? And how has Oregon apparently, or potentially, I should say, been able to kind of overcome that to be the leader to land the former Husky?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with the transfer portal, there's just every recruitment seems like it's so much more highly contested or hotly contested, however you want to look at it. I think that the premium that is being placed on transfer portal players to sometimes serve as just kind of Band-Aids or, plug and play guys for only a year versus someone maybe like a Dante Moore who has 3 years of their college recruitment, college career left. I think that just the immediacy and the approach from a lot of these schools, some of them becoming portal schools or relying on the transfer portal to a really heavy extent over that of the high school ranks. I think that has really, made it super important to get these guys on campus first. I mean, look at what the Ducks did with Evan Stewart. They were the first visit there, and I believe that was the only visit he took. So he saw what he needed and then ended up committing to Oregon. But as far as overcoming that with Jabbar Muhammad, I think that getting out to see him in Texas was, early on in that recruitment was of vital importance to just show that that was a huge priority for them, that's somebody that they really, really want. And then, I never really viewed Alabama I still don't really view Alabama as a major contender in this recruitment, just because you have to look at the roster composition and what they have there to ultimately be a competitor. I just think that Oregon has the better situation. So you always kind of have to, keep your ear to the ground on what's going on in the transfer portal. You got to keep relationships with previous, guys. This is more of the big picture, not so much for Muhammad. You have to keep those relationships because sometimes finishing second isn't so bad these days. But really, I think it's just Dan Lanning doing his thing, continuing to recruit at a high level and build out this team the way that he has.
I think the Alabama recruiting pitch to Muhammad would be, hey, we've had a lot of departures and we need guys of your caliber to maintain the level of play that we expect to play at down here in Tuscaloosa. I think the advantage that Oregon's got is that, the secondary is going to be very competitive. I think Muhammad would be one of the top two guys that we'd see in the secondary next year. But one of the advantages that I think Oregon has is that the two big defensive moves that Kalen DeBoer has made down in Tuscaloosa were hiring the South Alabama and the Buffalo head coach to be on the defensive staff. The South Alabama guy is going to be the DC. The Buffalo head coach is going to be the DB's coach. And so I don't know that Muhammad has got a connection to either of those guys, whereas Oregon has been able to make this connection. And I understand, DeBoer and a bunch of other coaching members have, obviously they know Jabbar and want to get him down there. But it's different when the head coach is an offensive guy and the biggest coach he brought with him is the offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb. So I think that's where Oregon's advantage lies in kind of holding that over Alabama. But, I think if Oregon is able to lock this down over Texas, that'd be two players that Oregon has gotten out of the portal that Texas really wanted, because they wanted Jamari Caldwell too. And I think that's a testament to two guys that are Texas-based. Caldwell was playing in the state of Texas this year. Jabbar Muhammad's from the state of Texas. His cousin plays for the Longhorns. Oregon being able to get both of these guys, I think would be a major, major statement about what they can do in the transfer portal when it comes to recruiting.
Absolutely. It absolutely would. And I think that their approach differs from some in college football. I just talked about this on one of my recent episodes of the podcast, just about how they're going for quality over quantity. And I think that this could be, I wouldn't say the last, but, if you're looking at Dan Lanning's first couple of cycles, you've seen a pretty decent haul in the transfer portal. But what I'm saying is I think as more of his high school guys get in and get up to speed, we could see less of a reliance on the portal and maybe a little bit smaller of a haul at this point next year. But yeah, they're doing things big out there in Eugene, and I think that Dan Lanning's doing everything he can to make this team as competitive as humanly possible in that first year in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think Oregon's going to be in a really good spot. I talked on yesterday's show, and getting Muhammad would only bolster my feeling in this sense that Oregon should be one of the top two teams in the Big Ten. If Jim Harbaugh is not there, I think Sherrone Moore could be a good head coach. We know he can coach on game days and win games, but what sort of roster is he going to be working with? And is it the same as having Jim Harbaugh physically in the building and involved with all the elements that go into, playing a college football game? My argument would be no. And so I look at Ohio State and say, okay, they've had a great offseason. But the next team you would put in there is Oregon. And, Penn State's done a couple of good things, but, they've got their quarterback returning. He wasn't all that impressive last year, but certainly could improve. They brought in Julian Fleming from Ohio State. I like that move. But I like Oregon's moves quite a bit, which is what we're going to talk about to wrap up today's show after we talk about FanDuel, because the NFL regular season, well, yeah, that's come and gone, but the playoffs are here. Conference championship weekend is here, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. So if you think Oregon would beat Ohio State by more than 1.5 is what I saw the line at Autzen Stadium. I think I meant to say last saw the line at, and it came out differently, but you understand what I'm saying. You can go bet that over at FanDuel right here, right now, and get 150 in bonus bets, whether you're right or wrong. It's that easy. The app is super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk about the offseason moves Oregon has made, because I love what they have done across the board. Troy Franklin out, Evan Stewart in. Jackson Powers Johnson, Stephen Jones out, Poncho will slide over, bring in Matthew Bedford from Indiana. I think the way that they have filled needs has been really good. The receiver depth is there. I love the tight end room with T. Ferg back. I really, really like the Jamari Caldwell addition to be kind of, an interior centerpiece to help those young guys grow into their roles. What do you make of all the transfer portal and high school recruiting moves that Oregon has done in this offseason for 2024?
It's hard not to be a fan of the guys that they're bringing in. I think you just look at the needs that they had and the way that they've moved to go about addressing them. I don't think that there's any glaring weaknesses. I think one big point that I'm pretty excited about for Oregon is the way that they, I think, turned up the heat on linebacker recruiting from 2023 to 2024. I think that was a position that was a little bit underwhelming. Last year, they only, in terms of the guys that they signed, they only signed one guy from the prep ranks, and Jerry Mixon, who I know the staff is super excited about, just that the athleticism that he brings to the table. But here in 2024, I'm really stoked about how the Ducks, filled and bolstered their quarterback room, bringing in this year's guy and Dylan Gabriel and their long-term guy and Dante Moore. Maybe he just was meant to be in Eugene all along. And then the talent that they bring in the wide receiver room, it's just like overflowing with guys. But I think really when it's all said and done, I think the portal guys that the high school and portal guys collectively, like that position I'm most excited about is probably the secondary. And it's not because they didn't have talent at that position. I just think that they said, okay, we're good, but we're not where we need to be. Let's take it a step further and really make sure we're feeling good. I know we were just talking about Jabbar Muhammad, but if he were to commit to Oregon, he'd be the second transfer corner that the Ducks bring in, and then going out to get Brandon Johnson, another guy who can cover, which is so important. And I don't think they necessarily had that at the level they needed last year. So you have to be excited about the way that they've brought in talent from the high school ranks, a bunch of beef in the trenches, especially along that D line. I think it's the best D line haul in the country for this cycle. But man, Dan Lanning's got it firing on all cylinders up there in Eugene.
It's not as if Oregon's pass defense was bad last year. It was the best in the Pac-12. It just wasn't good enough to stop Washington. And my contention has been that, Michigan is the only team in the country that was able to slow down Washington in a big spot. I know Arizona State did as well, but there are pretty credible reports that Washington was not at full strength throughout the course of that game. I don't think Jalen McMillan played, and it was a different offense when you had all three NFL receivers. And when those guys are going, it's just a really, really difficult thing to try and stop. And Oregon wasn't able to get, enough consistent pressure against a really, really good Washington offensive line. So I think the Ducks defense was very good in 2023. I think their pass defense was very good. Their rush defense statistically was good. They allowed less than 100 yards a game. So I like where their defense was at, and that gives me confidence in the coaching staff's ability to grow, to develop players, to make the necessary scheme adjustments that just weren't present in 2022. Because if you look at that first-year defense under Dan Lanning and company and the second-year defense, last year's was just, way better. Like way better. And I think that this group could take another step forward when you look at the talent that they are bringing in. I think it'll come down to how guys pop on the defensive line, because you don't know which of those 4 stars are going to, who are going to be redshirt freshmen will shine on the interior. But I think what's curious about the secondary, Max, is Oregon only brought in one safety. Brandon Johnson from Duke is a guy who projects to play nickel in all likelihood. But they only brought in one safety via the portal, and they lost 3 guys from the room total. Steve Stevens, Evan Williams, or 4 actually. Damon David and Brian Addison both transferred. Now, the latter 2 were more depth pieces by the end of the year, though Addison was a starter at the beginning of the season. But no Stevens, no Evan Williams. You bring in Kobe Savage from Kansas State. You get Tysheem Johnson back, but I get the sense that they're high on somebody to make an impact there, whether it's Tyler Turner, Cody DeCambra, or in the 2024 cycle, Aaron Flowers or Kingston Lopa. Do you get that sense? Because they've played with 3 safeties so often. Maybe they run with 3 corners, more than they did a season ago. But I feel like there's somebody who we don't really know which one. It'd be a guessing game, who the coaching staff is high on, and they think, yeah, this guy is going to play on the back end of Oregon's defense next year?
I would say that I get that kind of feeling too. And after getting to see him, I feel like Aaron Flowers could be that guy that is really generating some buzz coming into this, his college career, right? I mean, that's a guy who played really high level football out in Texas. I think he was one of the centerpieces of Forney's deep playoff run into the Texas State playoffs, which, as we know, is one of the best states in the country just to go and find high school football talent. So that's kind of the feel that I get. I also wonder if there's kind of a backdoor possibility of a corner guy maybe move into that safety room just because there are so many players in that room. So we'll have to see. But I think the other point that I wanted to mention here, Spencer, before we wrap up is I'm not saying they're like the same situations, but bear with me. I'm wondering if we see any similarities here. We've been seeing how Ohio State's been going all in the portal this offseason, right? You've seen guys like Caleb Downs and Will Howard coming over. So 2 huge additions. And then you also saw Julian Sand transfer from Alabama and then Aaron Nolan's coming in as well. So like these are just all in moves. Ohio State was making all of those moves primarily because why? They couldn't beat Michigan. When I look at Oregon and their moves in the secondary, I feel like they're making those moves not singularly to address the fact that they lost those Washington games, because those are 3 points each loss, right? I'm not saying that it's the exact same deal, and I'm also not saying that Washington's going to be what they were this past year.
No, they won't be.
But I don't think it'd be a stretch to say maybe they run into a team like that in the Big Ten next year or in that expanded playoff. And that margin for error is so small if they want to get to where they believe they can get, and that's their first national championship. So you hit the portal as hard as they're hitting it because you want to give yourself some kind of insurance and just have as deep of a roster and as talented a roster as you possibly can.
I think that's about as clean a way as we could wrap up today's show, because I think your thought is correct, and I think that for the Ducks, it clearly was the weakest part of their excuse me. Wow, it is really time to end today's show. If we're hacking up a lung here this morning, I don't even know, but I think Oregon's defense was very good. You had all conference caliber players at all 3 levels. Dorless along the D-line. I think Birch was honorable mention. You had Bosa's second team Pac-12. Jackson was a second team all Pac-12. There were a lot of talented players last season. I think that Oregon did see, hey, we can still get better in the coverage element, and I think that they've attacked that very well. Max Torres, Ducks Dish Podcast, covers Oregon for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. Max, always great to have you on, my guy.
Appreciate you having me on, Spencer. Always a good time.
Appreciate everyone listening and bearing with my crappy voice in 2 instances to begin and end the show. But have a good weekend. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.